On this episode of OC Unsolved, we cover the mystery of the MV Joyita, a disaster in which a pleasure yacht went missing only to reappear half-sunken and damaged, with the only evidence anyone was there being a bloody bandage. What happened to the crew and passengers, and could this be the works of ghosts? Let's get into it. The MV Joyita was built in 1931 as a wooden pleasure yacht for the director Roland West. Known for his film noir movies, and for being involved in the death of Thelma Todd, the ship was named after his wife, Jewel Carmen. In 1936, the ship was sold to Milton E. Bacon. Milton made frequent trips up and down the coast of California, including to the San Francisco International Exhibition. The ship was made of 2-inch cedar oak frames for buoyancy, meaning that even if the ship was fully flooded, it was literally unsinkable. She was 21 meters long, 5 meters wide, and had 2 meters below the waterline. Her speed was unknown. In 1941, she was bought by the US Navy and used as a patrol boat around the Big Island of Hawaii. Her name was also changed to YP-108. 2 months after she was bought by the Navy, she survived the infamous attack at Pearl Harbor, sustaining damage from shrapnel. During the war, she hit a reef in Hawaii and survived. After the war, she was sold to a firm that installed cork lining to add more buoyancy and gave her a fridge. Her new owner was William Tavers, who intended to sail her around the Pacific. However, he soon sold it to a professor at the University of Hawaii, who proceeded to charter it to a friend. This friend was Captain Thomas Miller, who used the boat to fish around the island of Samoa, eventually getting a contract with the government of New Zealand to carry supplies from Samoa to Tokelau. On October 13th, 1955, she left Apia, Samoa, bound for Tokelau. The initial departure was delayed due to issues with the ship's clutch. The ship eventually left Samoa on only one engine. She was carrying 16 crew and 9 passengers on board, including a government official, a doctor, and a World War II surgeon on his way to perform an amputation, as well as 2 children. Her cargo consisted of medical supplies, timber, and oil drums, as well as food and other supplies for the island. She was set to arrive on October 5th, with the journey lasting 6 days, and yes, they were basically cramming over 20 people on this small ship. By the way, I should say a lot of photos for this section are because of postcards made by the government of Samoa, so shout out to Samoa. On October 6th, she still had not arrived at Tokelau. A message was received from Whakafo Harbor reporting she was overdue. No ship was ever reported receiving a distress call. An air, land, and sea search was conducted using Sunderlands by the New Zealand Air Force. It covered 100,000 square miles, but the ship and her crew was never found. 5 weeks later, on November 10th, the ship MV Tuvalu spotted the Joyita while sailing to Tuvalu. The ship was heavily listed and with the port railing underwater. There was no trace of any of the ship's crew or passengers. 4 tons of cargo were also missing, as well as the ship's lifeboats, rafts, and life jackets. The radio was tuned to 2182 kHz, the international channel for distress call. The barnacles were higher than usual, showing the ship was capsized for a long time. There was damage to the superstructure and the flying bridge was torn up. The deckhouse windows were also smashed in. Strangely, the starboard engine was covered in mattresses, and the port clutch, which was previously mentioned was damaged, was disassembled. The starter of the port engine was also missing. The clock stopped at 10:25, and the nav lights and cabin lights were turned on, indicating whatever happened at night. The logbook, which is where the captain writes down what happened during the voyage, was missing, as well as the sextant, chronometer, which are used to navigate using the stars, were also gone, and the gun the captain kept was also missing. The doctor's bag that the surgeon was carrying was found on deck and contained a stethoscope, scalpel, as well as a bloody bandage. Half of the ship's fuel was still there, and, due to that cork lining, the ship stayed afloat. Once the water was pumped, it floated upright. An inquiry was held in Apaya and determined that the cause was unexplainable, but noted that the vessel was in a poor state. They also noted that their evidence was consistent of an orderly evacuation. However, they did figure out how the vessel flooded. A cracked coolant pipe flooded the ship, and the fact that the cargo blocked the pipe from being repaired caused the ship to partly sink, staying afloat only due to that cork lining. It also blamed the captain for setting out with numerous minor failures and only one engine. However, they did not find out what happened to the passengers and why the pipe cracked. With that, let's get into the theories. Theory 1 is a captain injury. Considering how the captain knew the ship could stay afloat even when flooded, this led some to believe that he was injured or died, hence the bloody bandages. Without him, passengers may have panicked when the ship flooded and evacuated, but this would not account for the missing cargo. A friend of Captain Miller said that he would have never left the ship alive since he knew about the ship's buoyancy. Theory 2 is that the passengers were abducted by aliens. Theory 3 is that the Japanese took the passengers after they saw something they shouldn't have. This was after World War II, but some Japanese units were still fighting. There was strong anti-Japanese sentiment in parts of the Pacific, and in Fiji, there was specific resentment of Japan being allowed to operate fishing fleets in local waters. Such theories suddenly gained traction when men clearing the Joyita found knives stamped "Made in Japan." However, tests on the knives proved negative, and it turned out that the knives were old and broken, possibly left on board from when the Joyita was used for fishing in the late 40s. The fourth theory was insurance fraud. The captain had lots of unpaid debt due to a series of unsuccessful trips on the Joyita. However, it would have been hard to fake it due to the seacocks being closed. Also, the Joyita was on a contract with the New Zealand government for runs between Tokelau and Samoa, which would have quickly cleared his debts. The fifth theory is mutiny. A man named Robert McGooham, who bought the ship after this, spent years investigating its past and put his findings in a book called The Joyita Mystery. He agreed the flooding started due to a cracked pipe and failure of the pumps. He said the mattresses were likely to slow the leak or to protect the switchboard. He theorized that the captain knew the ship could not sink and pressed on. The ship then encountered a storm with winds of 40 knots. The passengers demanded they turn back and staged a mutiny, injuring the captain. Flooding would have eventually caused the engine to fail, and the crew would have ordered an abandoned ship, to never be seen again. While there isn't a lot of evidence for this theory, I do think it explains a lot, and I think the missing cargo might have just fallen overboard or something, but that depends on if it was outside of the ship or in the ship. In 1956, the ship was sold to Robert McGooham, who wrote that book I mentioned earlier. She was sold again and sailed around Fiji. She ran aground in 1959, giving her enough damage to partly sink again. After gaining a notorious reputation, she was laid up and used for parts, becoming a hulk. In 1966, she was bought by Major J. Castling Cottle, who ran a tourist and publicity bureau in Lekufuta in Fiji. The plan was to turn her into a museum. However, this never happened, and she slowly rotted away. By the late 70s, she was fully gone. The case has become an infamous example of ghost ships, and it was also called the Mary Celeste of the Pacific. To this day, no one knows what happened to the crew, and no remains were ever found. With 22 missing people, a long-gone ship, and a case that is partly solved, the disappearance of the Joyita remains unsolved.